A few months ago, we talked about 7 enemy encounters in Soulsborne that made you want to throw your controller, difficulty spikes that made you realise these games are in fact quite hard. Today, we're flipping the script as we talk about enemy encounters in Soulsborne that are fun or memorable for whatever reason, whether that be because they are a fun challenge, or because they tell an interesting story through gameplay, or for the design decisions that went into them. They can still be difficult, but these encounters always leave me with a sense of, nice, glad I managed that. And I've even taken some suggestions from my audience over on my community tab. In fact, I think 5 of the 7 entries in today's video are audience-based. Thank you so much everyone for your submissions. I'm Billy S, and these are 7 of the best enemy encounters in Souls that made you go,
wow.
Nice.
Starting the list, we have the enemy encounter that inspired this for me, the start of the Undead Parish, where you face the Armoured Boar and a series of melee and ranged hollows. This encounter has a lot of layers to it, depending on your experience with the game. You could rush through to try and get through the far gate before one of the hollows closes it on your ass, which would force you to trek through the basement and side corridors. You could choose to kite the boar onto the entry stairway, abusing aggro ranges to try and get a quick backstab. You can snipe the various hollows from afar with a ranged weapon one at a time, or rush right in and climb the right stairwell so you're safe from the boar. This leaves you in range of the various archers on the rooftop, but if you shield carefully and don't get overwhelmed, you can slay them all, leaving you with just the boar to contend with. And this mini-boss doesn't respawn, so once he goes down, this encounter becomes a lot easier on repeat attempts. What I love is that you can find alluring skulls on the little bridge up here, which are items that attract enemies towards them when thrown. So, if you're smart, you'll think, let's throw this alluring skull on the fire pit, which will cause the boar to walk towards the fire and potentially burn itself to death. You can overcome this scenario without ever having to raise your sword against the beast, using your wits to come out on top. And it's that little bit of game design that has stuck with me for the better part of a decade, because that makes the only threat in the zone the hollows, and you've just gone through an entire area comprised solely of them in the Undead Burg. Sure, this setup is tougher, with there being multiple archers on the rooftops alongside a few melee hollows that follow you from the street below, but if you've learned anything from the previous area, it's how to overcome these little enemy crowds. And with them down and the alluring skulls in reach, the Parish Boar encounter becomes one you will never have to worry about again, until your next playthrough when you decide to try being aggressive and the boar rams you into a wall, of course. Our next entry comes from YouTube user Harley or Nugget, who says, "A personal favourite of mine is the graveyard encounter in the Hunter's Nightmare. We get to see 2 old hunters doing what they do best, massacring beasts." They're talking about the Bloodborne enemy encounter that takes place near the start of the Hunter's Nightmare DLC. As you crest over the opening hills, you see the large courtyard of Cathedral Ward, now filled with weak, anemic beasts that cower from the sight of you. For we are now in the Hunter's Nightmare where beasts are endlessly slain and the hunters drink their fill. Speaking of hunters, that's when some old hunters rock up from the far side of the courtyard, and while you can fight them yourself, you can also sit back and watch the fireworks. Because the hunter enemies of the DLC are designed to also target any beasts that wander too close. They could be targeting you, sure, but one of those scraggly motherfuckers walks in and the hunter will sense easy prey. No cutscenes needed, this is a narrative that is explained entirely through the gameplay itself. And while Harley or Nugget does admit that this encounter is a little simple, with it being elevated more so due to its lore focus, that doesn't change how cool the setup is. It certainly helps that the old hunters are some of the best enemies in Bloodborne as well, period. Back to Dark Souls, we have Left-Handed Scout 9923, who technically suggested the various enemy encounters with Siegmeyer of Katarina, and I have to agree. There are 3 instances across Dark Souls that work with this topic. The first is in Sen's Fortress, where rather than fighting enemies yourself, you instead see a trail of enemies that lead over to Siegmeyer, sleeping atop a perilous cliff. It shows his level of skill when it comes to a fight, and should tell you, he knows how to defend himself, but he can't progress because of the rolling boulder trap. His second encounter is in Anor Londo, where he warns you to steer clear of a room filled with Silver Knights that he'll handle himself, only for you to enter the room, effortlessly parry all 3 knights, and prove to him that you are just as capable, if not more capable, than he. Which leads to the final enemy encounter in Lost Izalith, where he dives into a pit of Chaos Eaters to help us escape, wanting to perish in that moment in glorious battle. But we rob him of the opportunity by killing the enemies before he can die, which ultimately causes his daughter to kill him in Ash Lake instead. These instances aren't really about the enemies themselves, but about Siegmeyer and his dawning realization that as long as we are around, we will continue to hold that glory that he so desperately clings to. We are a reminder of who he once was, who he could be, and who he also can't be. I just like that rather than conveying all of this in dialogue trees, we get to see this firsthand through our own actions. We just wanted to help against the Silver Knights, against the Chaos Eaters, but sometimes when you help someone, you accidentally hurt them. In Dark Souls 2, user ExiledTS suggests that the Dragon Shrine in Dark Souls 2, if you play it the correct way, is actually a very fun area. This is because the Dragon Shrine, at least in Scholar of the First Sin, has a rather unique enemy premise. You are here as a guest, but also as someone who needs to be tested as worthy of meeting the Ancient Dragon. As such, while you ascend the shrine, you'll run into various Drake Knights and their associates. The larger knights will challenge you to a duel, and if you're able to defeat them, the Drake Knights will let you pass free of charge. If you try to run past without finishing the duel, however, all the enemies aggro onto you. This forces you to take part in what the game wants, multiple small duels that see you facing down large enemies to come out on top. I love this because there is nowhere else in the series where the enemies of an area are this respectful to you. You never get a break in FromSoft games, with everyone wanting to kill your player character and then some. But this change, which was made from the original Dark Souls 2, where the Dragon Shrine was just a normal zone with normally aggroing enemies, gave this location a lot of personality and memorability. I really want FromSoft to revisit this type of enemy design in their future games. They touched upon this with various covenants in the Souls trilogy, where if you were a part of them, certain enemies wouldn't attack you, but the Dragon Shrine enemy encounters are just far more layered, as you don't need to be in a covenant, you've just got to show your stuff. Popping back to Dark Souls for a fairly quick entry, user Oriel suggests the Black Knight in the Undead Burg. Such an intimidating enemy when you first encounter it, but is actually a very fun fight, and it can of course be made way easier with parries. The concept of a higher level enemy being faced in a lower level area is something that has existed long before Souls games came about. You can find this in various RPGs over the decades, and yet it's a trope that remains fun no matter the implementation. The main reasoning for this being that, on your first playthrough, a tough opponent like the Black Knight in the Undead Burg can prove a genuine challenge, while on future playthroughs, it's just a skill check, a way to showcase how far you've come by how easily you dispatch him. The Undead Burg Black Knight is a perfect example, being a threatening figure who stands ominously at the end of an alleyway, who strikes fear into new players. But then when you know how to parry, you can absolutely ruin this Black Knight's day, taking him down in nothing more than a couple of hits. The Giant Crystal Lizard in Dark Souls 3, the Ogres in Dark Souls 2, the Tree Sentinel in Elden Ring, heck, the Red-Eyed Knight in Demon Souls 1-1, this is a trope that will continue to flourish with this series. But this single Black Knight down an optional path I think is the most effective use in the series as far as regular enemies go. Popping over to Elden Ring, this is a personal Billy S pick for the list, and almost certainly will only be relevant to me. In fact, it's quite similar to our previous entry, featuring an enemy found at the end of an optional path that is of a very difficult persuasion. However, this one has a bit of infamy, and is encountered later in Elden Ring's game. I can't explain why, but I can't forget the dual-wielding Banished Knight in Castle Sol. This is a single ghostly figure who, if you try to sneak up on, will nothing personal kid you with a teleport so seamless that science should study it. It's a souped-up, hard-hitting variant of the Banished Knight enemy type with long-hitting dual-wielding combos that can decimate a late-game player, and will almost certainly destroy anyone unprepared with their build. And yet, I really like this guy. He is a troll, ensuring you can't run away because if you do, he'll warp after you and say no, back in the arena. He doesn't even teach you anything special like the boar in the parish, nor does he have a deeper meaning to his appearance. I just think he's fun to fight, and I wanted to include at least one instance in this video of an encounter that I felt was just pure enjoyment. Not for everyone, this man's got his haters and detractors in their droves, understandably so, but apparently I'm glutton for punishment, and that means I like to get smacked around by a teleporting madman who puts up way more of a fight than many of the game's bosses. Sue me. Finally, we end this video back in Dark Souls 2, as I put the focus on a boss turned mini-boss who haunts the player in the early game. The Pursuer is one of my favourite boss fights in Dark Souls 2, has one of the coolest designs in the game, and yet once you kill him, that was it in the original release. In Scholar, however, he decided to listen to his namesake and become an unstoppable force that would chase you down to the ends of the earth. The Pursuer would appear throughout areas in the game to force you to fight him as a regular enemy. Multiple spawn locations in the Lost Bastille, which makes sense, you are being hunted. The Pursuer sees himself as an executioner, and the Lost Bastille is a giant prison complex. But he also shows up in other locations. The gender-affirming coffin in Things Betwixt is a dangerous spot to spawn him in, as you can be flanked by two large ogres if you're not careful, making that encounter one you need to prep for by beating the large ogres first, which is worth it for the Handmaid's Ladle, gotta say. He can show up in the Smelter Demon boss arena after defeating the boss and reloading the area, which is also worth fighting, as you get a valuable Ring of Blades for your victory. Perhaps my favourite instance of the Pursuer showing up to ruin my day though is on New Game Plus, where, when you enter Drangleic Castle, if you decide to go to the throne room behind Chancellor Welliger, you'll have not one, but two Pursuers spawn to try and cut you down. This happened to me at the very end of my 100% run of the game, mere moments after purchasing the very last items I needed from Welliger to actually activate the final trophy. And what a way to close out my Dark Souls 2 experience, let me tell you. Whoever decided the Pursuer should actually pursue the player, you deserve a raise. And whoever decided the Pursuer shouldn't be in Night Rain, change your mind, he's perfect there, we all know it, add him! And that's my list. Did you guys enjoy this video? Let me know down below. 200 likes and I'll do a sequel featuring all of you in the YouTube comments. How tempting. Be sure to parry that subscribe button to stay up to date on my future videos so that you don't miss a single one. Massive shout out to my YouTube channel members, $4.99 a month. You get early access to certain videos, you get a shout out in the description at the end of videos as well, and you have access to a Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3 playthrough. Good places to be. Thanks for watching, I'll see you guys next time. Adios.